Some heroes wear capes. You see them on the silver screen, larger than life. But the real ones, the ones who've walked through hellfire and back, they don't need the spotlight. They don't crave the attention. They move in silence, their greatness hidden in plain sight, their heroism a quiet, steady flame inside a chest full of medals they never talk about. Today, we're talking about one of those quiet professionals, a man forgotten by the very system he swore to protect, until one fateful day when a couple of loudmouths decided to pick on the wrong old man. This is the story of what happens when disrespect meets legacy. The air in the records annex at Fort Stewart, Georgia, wasn't just hot. It was a physical weight. It was a suffocating wet blanket woven from the smells of decaying paper, bitter coffee burnt hours ago, and the faint, ever-present odor of diesel fumes and pine straw baking under the relentless Georgia sun. The only sound was the rhythmic, asthmatic hum of an ancient air conditioning unit that did little more than move the thick air around, offering no relief. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, greenish pallor on the endless rows of drab, olive-green filing cabinets that stood like silent steel soldiers in the tomb of military bureaucracy. In this purgatory of paperwork sat an old man. His name, according to the small plastic tag on his desk, was S. Keene. He was a civilian clerk, a ghost in the machine. He was smaller than you'd expect, with a quiet stillness that seemed to absorb the noise around him. His hair was silver, cut high and tight in a style decades out of fashion. He wore simple khaki trousers, pressed with a razor-sharp crease, and a crisp white button-down shirt. His shoes, a pair of simple leather Oxfords, were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the flickering fluorescent lights above. Everything about him was precise. The pens on his desk were aligned in a perfect row, parallel to the edge. The stacks of files he was processing, transfers, commendations, disciplinary actions, were perfectly squared, their edges forming flawless right angles. His job was the very definition of low status on a bustling army post, managing the paper trail of soldiers' lives, a task both critical and utterly thankless. And then there was the limp. It was barely perceptible, a slight hesitation in his gait as he moved from his desk to the filing cabinets. A ghost of an injury, a subtle hitch in his otherwise steady rhythm. It was a detail most people would never notice. But today, two people noticed. Specialist Miller and Private First Class Johnson were everything S. Keene was not. They were loud, sloppy, arrogant. Their uniforms were rumpled, their boots scuffed. Miller chewed a wad of tobacco, the bulge in his cheek distorting his perpetual sneer. Johnson leaned back in his chair, a cocky grin plastered on his face, scrolling through his phone. They were waiting on transfer papers, and their patience had worn thin. "Hey!" Miller barked, his voice cutting through the quiet hum. "Old man, we ain't got all day. You find those papers yet, or you still trying to remember your own name?" Keene didn't look up. His hands, weathered but steady, continued to glide through the files. "Just a moment, Specialist. I need to ensure the chain of custody is properly documented." Johnson snorted. "Chain of custody? Bro, it's just paper. Just stamp it and move on." He looked at Miller and smirked. "Look at him, hobbling around like that. What's the matter, Grandpa? Trip over your walker on the way in this morning?" The insult hung in the thick, stagnant air. Keene's hands paused for a fraction of a second over an open file. He said nothing. The silence was his shield. He simply resumed his work, his movements economical and deliberate, as if their words were nothing more than buzzing flies. This silence, this refusal to engage, was a language the two young soldiers couldn't comprehend, and it infuriated them. Before we see how this hero silenced the room, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more true stories of courage. You're not going to want to miss the moment these punks get what's coming to them. Miller, angered by the old man's silence, stood up and swaggered over to the desk. "You deaf, old-timer? We're talking to you." He leaned over, his shadow falling across the meticulously organized workspace. "My boys are waiting to clear post. We got places to be, and you're in here playing with your stamps. This is pathetic. Bet you were some pencil pusher your whole life, never saw a day of real action." With a flick of his hand, Miller carelessly knocked over a perfectly stacked pile of DD-214 forms. The papers, each one representing a soldier's completed service, scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. "Oops," Miller said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "Clumsy me." Keene finally stopped. He slowly bent down, his movements stiff. Keene finally stopped. He slowly bent down, his movements stiff. The slight limp was more pronounced now. One by one, he began to gather the scattered papers. As he reached for the last one, Johnson, feeling emboldened, picked up a heavy metal-bound copy of the Army Regulations from a nearby shelf. "Here, Grandpa," Johnson sneered. "Let me help you file this." He tossed the heavy book underhanded, aiming for the trash can near the old man's feet. And that's when it happened. The glitch. The book tumbled through the air, end over end, a clumsy, lazy toss. For a civilian clerk, an old man with a limp, it would have been an impossible catch. It should have hit the floor with a heavy thud, but S. Keene didn't move like a clerk. In a blur of motion that defied his age and apparent fragility, his left hand shot out. It didn't just catch the book, it intercepted it. His fingers, perfectly spaced, clamped down on its center of gravity, stopping its momentum instantly and silently. It was the practiced, instinctual movement of a man who had caught far faster, far more lethal things in his life. For a single, fleeting second, the mask of the quiet, unassuming clerk vanished. His eyes, when they flickered up, were not the soft eyes of a retiree. They were chips of cold, hard steel. They held a history of violence and discipline that was terrifyingly out of place in this dusty, forgotten office. The moment passed as quickly as it came. The steel in his eyes receded, replaced by that same placid calm. He placed the book on his desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. The two soldiers saw the catch, but they didn't understand it. "Whoa, lucky catch, Grandpa," Johnson laughed, oblivious. "Still got some reflexes, huh?" Miller just shook his head in disgust, turning back to his chair. But the audience, you and I, we saw it. We saw the flicker of the warrior. The spring was being compressed. The door to the annex swung open, and the suffocating heat seemed to bow before the figures who entered. They didn't just walk in, they occupied the space. There were 3 of them, and they moved with a synchronized, predatory grace that made the air crackle. They were not regular soldiers. Their uniforms were sterile, devoid of unit patches. Their gear was top of the line and customized. They were the quiet professionals, the men who operate in the shadows. These were operators from the Army's most elite Special Missions Unit, the kind of men who don't officially exist. Leading them was an Army captain. He was tall, wiry, with the lean, hard muscle of a man who lived at the peak of human performance. His face was a mask of hardened discipline, but it was his eyes that held you. They were 1,000-yard stare personified, eyes that had seen things most people couldn't even imagine. Miller and Johnson snapped to a clumsy version of attention. Their arrogance evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked fear. These were not men to be trifled with. "Captain," Miller stammered, his voice suddenly 2 octaves higher. "Can we, help you, sir?" The captain's gaze swept the room, dismissing the 2 sloppy soldiers in an instant. His eyes were searching. He scanned the rows of filing cabinets, the cluttered desks, and then they stopped. They locked onto the old man. The captain froze. Every ounce of sound drained from the room. The hum of the air conditioner, the buzzing of the lights, the frantic beating of Miller and Johnson's hearts. It all vanished. The air became thick, heavy, unbreathable. The captain's hard, emotionless face cracked. A flicker of disbelief, then awe, then a wave of profound, absolute reverence washed over his features. He took one slow, deliberate step forward, then another. He moved past the 2 terrified specialists as if they were furniture. He stopped directly in front of the small, tidy desk of S. Keene. The towering, combat-honed operator stood before the quiet, elderly clerk. Miller and Johnson were paralyzed, their minds screaming in confusion. What was happening? Then the captain did something that shattered their entire understanding of the world. He clicked his heels together. His entire body snapped into the most rigid, perfect position of attention a soldier could possibly assume. And then, with a slowness that filled the crushing silence, he raised his hand to his brow and delivered the most profound, heartfelt salute of his life. It was a gesture of ultimate submission, of a warrior paying homage to a legend. He held the salute, his eyes locked on the old man. S. Keene looked up, and for the first time, a hint of a smile touched his lips. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The captain slowly lowered his hand. He turned his head just enough to pin Miller and Johnson with a gaze so cold, so full of contempt, it felt like a physical blow. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority. "You see this man?" he said, his voice a low growl. "You see this name tag, S. Keene?" He took a step towards them. They visibly flinched. "This man is Chief Master Sergeant Samuel Keene, retired. You will address him as Chief or Sir. To men like me, he is known by another name, the Shepherd." He let the nickname hang in the air. "Because everywhere he went, he brought his people back home." The captain's eyes narrowed. "You mocked his limp. He got that limp dragging 3 Rangers, one by one, out of a kill zone in the Korengal Valley after his position was overrun. He took a round to the femur and kept going." He pointed a finger at the scattered papers on the floor. "You called him a pencil pusher. This man has more confirmed engagements than your entire platoon has field exercises. The paper you so carelessly knocked on the floor is the final chapter of a soldier's service, something this man honored for 30 years. He took another step, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a chilling intensity. "This man is the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross. He was awarded it for extraordinary heroism while his unit was under heavy enemy fire. He remained at his position, providing covering fire so his platoon could withdraw to safety. He is the man who wrote the book on close quarters combat. He is the man who trained me. He is the reason I am alive today. Miller and Johnson were no longer standing. They were shrinking. Their faces were pale, their bodies trembling. The full, horrifying weight of their ignorance and arrogance came crashing down on them. They had not just insulted an old clerk, they had desecrated a living monument. Chief Keen slowly rose from his chair. He looked at the captain and gave him another slight nod, a silent message passing between two generations of warriors. Then, without a word to the two trembling wrecks before him, he turned and walked away, his slight limp the only sound in the suffocating silence. His quiet dignity was his only statement. He left the captain and his operators standing there, silent sentinels in a room now thick with shame. The villains were left shaking, their universe completely undone. True heroes don't need to shout their accomplishments from the rooftops. Their valor isn't measured in volume, but in the quiet respect of those who know. It's in the slow salute of a captain to a chief. It's in the silent nod that says more than words ever could. They are the quiet professionals, the shepherds who walk among us, and they've earned a respect that the loud, the arrogant, and the ignorant will never, ever understand.